Malta, April 1942. From 20,000 feet, the island barely existed. It was a pale scar in the blue expanse of the Mediterranean, a strip of limestone no wider than a rifle shot. But every pilot in the sky knew its importance. Malta was not defended because it was large. It was defended because without it, nothing else could be. The Axis bombers came daily, sometimes hourly. Junkers Ju-88s, Heinkel 111s, and Italian SM-79s droned in endless waves, escorted by Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Macchi C-202s that circled above like hawks guarding their prey. Bombs fell on airfields, docks, fuel depots, and cities. Smoke never fully cleared. Fires burned for days. The Royal Air Force fought back with whatever remained. At RAF Tockley, Spitfires stood in scattered revetments carved into rock. Their paint was faded by salt air and sun. Their tires were worn thin from emergency landings. Ground crews worked without pause, patching bullet holes with riveted aluminum, replacing control cables, sealing fuel leaks with improvised gaskets cut from scrap rubber. Pilots slept beside their aircraft when they could. Often they did not sleep at all. Every sortie was a calculation. Fuel versus distance. Speed versus survival. Ammunition versus opportunity. Nothing could be wasted. There were too few planes, too few men, and no safe rear area. It was arithmetic without mercy. Among the pilots walking the flight line that spring was Flight Lieutenant James McClachlan. He stood slightly apart from the others, watching the sky. At first glance, he looked like any other fighter pilot. He wore the same khaki uniform, the same Mae Westlife vest, the same parachute harness slung loosely over his shoulders. His face was lean, sunburned, and older than his 23 years. But there was one difference no one could ignore. His left arm was gone. The empty sleeve was neatly pinned just below the elbow. In its place, he wore a prosthetic, a rigid mechanical extension of wood and metal, strapped tightly around his upper arm and shoulder. It ended not in a hand, but in a reinforced leather cuff. It did not move. It did not grip. It existed only to hold. Most men with such an injury would never fly again. McClachlan flew almost every day. He had lost the arm the year before, shot down during an interception over Malta itself. Cannon shells had torn through his Hurricane's cockpit, shattering bone and rupturing fuel lines. Fire filled the confined space instantly. He bailed out through flame and smoke, landing in the sea below. Fishermen dragged him from the water, barely conscious. Surgeons amputated the arm hours later. They told him his flying career was over. He disagreed. Recovery took months. Pain was constant. The prosthetic was crude, uncomfortable, and unreliable. It could not replace the subtle pressure of muscle or the instinctive correction of fingers on a control stick. It offered only stability, nothing more. But stability was enough. McClachlan approached the problem like an engineer, not a patient. He studied cockpit layouts, memorized switch positions, practiced moving controls with one hand while locking the prosthetic cuff against the stick to maintain pressure during turns. He learned to operate trim wheels with his elbow. He trained his right hand to perform the work of two. He failed often. Controls slipped. Maneuvers stalled. Landings bounced dangerously. But he kept practicing. The Air Ministry Review Board watched his evaluation flights with skepticism. They expected caution, hesitation, limitation. They saw none. He flew smoothly, efficiently, calmly. Not perfectly, but well enough. Against recommendation, they cleared him for combat duty. He requested Malta. No one understood why he would choose the most dangerous airspace in the world. But Malta needed pilots, and McClachlan needed purpose. So he returned. The other pilots watched him carefully at first. Flying a Spitfire demanded precision. The aircraft was sensitive, responsive, unforgiving of mistakes. Combat multiplied those demands. Every maneuver required coordination between throttle, rudder, elevator, and ailerons. Every second required control. A missing arm meant disadvantage. Or so they assumed. But McClachlan adapted. He flew with his right hand firm on the stick, prosthetic cuff braced to stabilize during high-G maneuvers. He used trim aggressively, adjusting aerodynamic forces instead of relying solely on muscle. He anticipated movement instead of reacting to it. His flying looked different, less violent, more deliberate. Where others forced the aircraft, McClachlan guided it. Within days, he was flying interception missions alongside veterans of the siege. The Luftwaffe pilots above Malta were experienced, disciplined, and confident. They attacked from altitude, diving with speed and precision, forcing RAF fighters into defensive positions before they could respond. Survival depended on anticipation. Climb too late, and you died. Turn too sharply, and you bled speed. Lose sight of the enemy for even a moment, and he appeared behind you. Combat was geometry, and McClachlan understood geometry. Before the war, he had not been extraordinary. He was neither the best shot nor the most aggressive pilot. What set him apart was something quieter. He noticed patterns, enemy approach angles, energy states, reaction timing. He saw combat not as chaos, but as intersecting lines and probabilities. He realized something most pilots never consciously considered. Every maneuver was a prediction. Every enemy pilot fired not at where a target was, but at where he expected it to be. If that prediction failed, the attack failed. McClachlan began experimenting. Small changes at first. He delayed turns by fractions of seconds, altered descent angles, adjusted throttle mid-maneuver to disrupt closure rates. The results were subtle but effective. Enemy fighters overshot. Shots missed narrowly. Opportunities appeared where none should exist. His squadron mates noticed. They could not explain why German pilots occasionally broke off attacks prematurely, or why McClachlan seemed to survive situations others did not. He did not boast. He did not explain. He simply flew. One morning in late April, the scramble siren sounded before sunrise. Pilots ran toward their aircraft. Engines roared alive. Propellers blurred into spinning disks of silver. Within minutes, Spitfires clawed upward into the brightening sky. McClachlan climbed with them, rising through thin cloud toward incoming enemy formations detected on radar. At 18,000 feet, they saw them. Bombers below, fighters above, and 4 Messerschmitt Bf 109s already descending toward him. He was alone. No altitude advantage. No numerical advantage. No escape path. The mathematics were clear. 4 against 1. In air combat, that equation ended one way. The German pilots tightened their formation, confident in the outcome. They approached carefully, positioning themselves to eliminate maneuvering space, forcing the Spitfire into predictable defensive turns. They had done this dozens of times before. They expected panic. They expected retreat. They expected obedience to the logic of survival. McClachlan gave them none. Instead, he tipped his wings slightly, no more than 20 degrees, and held it there. Not diving, not turning, simply waiting. And in that moment of stillness, the geometry of the fight began to change. The Spitfire's nose dipped just enough to suggest hesitation. From the outside, it looked wrong. The aircraft did not dive for speed. It did not roll hard into a defensive turn. It did not climb to force an overshoot. It simply leaned, 20 degrees of bank, and held the angle as if the pilot had misjudged the fight. The first Messerschmitt closed fast. The German pilot had already committed. He had calculated deflection based on a Spitfire that would either tighten its turn or break away. Instead, the British fighter drifted, bleeding speed without accelerating, sliding slightly across the sky in a shallow, controlled slip. From the cockpit of the 109, it appeared indecisive, vulnerable. The second German adjusted his line to cut off the expected turn. The third climbed to block escape. The fourth hung back, waiting for a clean shot. For solutions converging on one assumption. McClachlan held the bank. He reduced throttle just a fraction. The Merlin engine note deepened, less aggressive. Airspeed bled away. The aircraft's nose yawed subtly, the fuselage presenting a misleading angle to any pilot computing deflection by instinct. It looked like loss of control. It was not. Inside the cockpit, McClachlan felt the pressure shift through the frame. He braced the prosthetic cuff against the control column to steady the bank. His right hand feathered the throttle. His right foot pressed rudder, not to turn, but to maintain the slip at the exact edge of instability. He was not fleeing. He was distorting the geometry. The lead 109 opened fire. Tracer rounds flashed past, arcing into empty sky. He had aimed at where the Spitfire should have been 2 seconds later. But the Spitfire was not continuing its path. At the moment the German committed, McClachlan reversed everything. Full throttle, opposite rudder, a rapid, clean roll toward level flight. The aircraft snapped out of the slip and surged forward, not diving but rising slightly, just enough to invalidate every firing solution calculated against it. The first 109 overshot violently, forced to pull up to avoid collision. The second fired into the vacuum left by the vanished target. The third broke formation to avoid the confusion. The fourth, still waiting for clarity, lost sight entirely as the Spitfire cut across the sun. For attackers, now scattered, no shots landed, no hits registered, and in the space of 3 seconds, the engagement shifted from execution to uncertainty. McClachlan did not chase. Chasing meant entering their energy state. He did not want parity. He wanted confusion. He dipped again, but this time in a climbing arc, using the regained speed to reposition rather than engage. The Germans regrouped cautiously, their formation less aggressive now. They had expected textbook behavior. They received unpredictability. For fighter pilots, hesitation is lethal. The Luftwaffe leaders knew it. Their doctrine depended on decisive commitment. Identify, calculate, fire, disengage. But commitment relies on prediction, and prediction relies on familiarity. The Spitfire beneath them no longer behaved familiarly. The lead German broke first, climbing to regain altitude advantage rather than pressing the attack. The second followed. The third widened his turn, uncertain. The fourth checked his 6, expecting counterattack. None came. By the time they reassembled into coherent formation, the Spitfire had slipped into a thin layer of haze near the coast. It vanished. Back at Tockley, ground crews saw only a distant speck descending unevenly toward the runway. Fuel gauges were nearly empty. The landing was uneventful, mercifully so. McClachlan taxied into revetment and shut down the engine. When he climbed out, his face was expressionless. His wingman landed moments later, shaking his head in disbelief. "You just leaned," he said. McClachlan shrugged. "They were committed," he replied simply. The debriefing room that afternoon was crowded. The intelligence officer wanted details. Exact bank angle, airspeed, timing, distance. Did he stall? Did he risk spin? Was it intentional? McClachlan answered calmly. Yes, it was intentional. No, it was not a stall. Yes, timing mattered. The maneuver was not magic. It was a slip, an aerodynamically inefficient attitude that traded lift for unpredictability. Most pilots use slips to lose altitude before landing. In combat, slips were discouraged. They bled energy and left the aircraft vulnerable. Unless vulnerability was the point. He explained that fighter combat relied on anticipation. Enemy pilots estimated position based on bank, speed, and trajectory. If you created a posture that suggested continuation, then reversed at the exact moment of their commitment, you forced overshoot. It required discipline. It required precise control. It required confidence in recovery. And it required the enemy to believe you were making a mistake. Wing Commander Mlan listened carefully. Is it teachable? He asked. McClachlan paused. Not as a primary tactic, he said. Only when you've nothing else. Mlan did not endorse it officially, but he did not forbid it either. Over the next weeks, a handful of Malta pilots attempted variations of the maneuver. Some executed it poorly and stalled. Others corrected too early and exposed themselves. But a few, those with delicate touch and steady nerves, found success. German reports began mentioning Spitfires behaving erratically. Italian pilots described targets that slid sideways before accelerating out of sight. The Luftwaffe issued advisories warning against premature commitment in low-energy engagements over Malta. Uncertainty spread. In warfare, uncertainty is force. By May 1942, aborted attacks over Malta increased measurably. Bombers released payloads early. Escorts disengaged without pressing advantage. Not because the RAF had superior numbers, but because they were no longer predictable. McClachlan flew nearly every day. He added 3 confirmed kills that month, 2 against Mackeys and 1 against a 109F. Each engagement began disadvantageously. Each ended with the enemy misjudging timing or position. He never claimed the maneuver as invention. It was simply adaptation. And in skies where survival was measured in seconds, adaptation was enough. In June, reinforcements arrived. More Spitfires, more fuel, more ammunition. The siege did not end, but the balance shifted. McClachlan was posted to North Africa in July. In Tunisia the following year, he was shot down again. This time he did not survive. He was 24. The wing dip was never formalized in manuals. No official report dissected the geometry. No training syllabus codified its timing. But the pilots who flew Malta remembered. And sometimes, when boxed in with no altitude, no speed, and too many enemies, they leaned the wing, just slightly, and waited. The German pilots could not explain it. Their reports described Spitfires behaving unpredictably, aircraft that appeared slow and vulnerable suddenly slipping away, targets that should have been easy kills dissolving into empty sky. Gun cameras captured nothing but missed opportunities. Some blamed fatigue. Others blamed the sun. None blamed geometry. McClachlan had not changed the Spitfire. He had changed the equation. He understood that air combat was prediction. Every pilot fired not at where the enemy was, but where he believed the enemy would be seconds later. The slip broke that prediction. It presented false motion, false intent. By the time the enemy realized the deception, the moment was gone. Uncertainty entered the fight. German escorts hesitated longer before committing. Italian pilots grew cautious. Bombers turned back sooner. The difference was not dramatic, but it was enough. In war, survival is often measured in seconds, and seconds compound. Other Malta pilots tried variations of the maneuver. Not all succeeded. It required restraint and precision. Too aggressive, and the aircraft stalled. Too timid, and the deception failed. But those who mastered it found themselves alive when they should have been dead. McClachlan never wrote it down. He never named it. He simply flew the only way his body allowed him to, anticipating motion instead of reacting to it. The loss of his arm had forced him to think ahead. Where others corrected mistakes, he prevented them. Where others reacted, he shaped the future of the fight. After his death in Tunisia in 1943, his logbook recorded victories, sorties, and aircraft destroyed. It did not record the engagements he survived by confusing the enemy long enough to escape. Those victories existed only in memory. Today, his prosthetic arm rests in the Imperial War Museum. Visitors see a relic. Pilots see a reminder. The lesson was never the maneuver itself. It was the mindset behind it. That doctrine is only a starting point. That limitation can create innovation. That survival sometimes belongs to the pilot willing to become unpredictable. James McClachlan did not defeat the Luftwaffe alone, but he proved something just as important, that even when outnumbered, outmatched, and physically broken, a pilot who understands the geometry of the fight can still find a way home.